the way we make house music is changing.
There's not just one way to make something that's to be successful. And honestly, making art to be successful is often a bad way to go about things. But making things to just be great is, I think, should be the first step. And often simple is the best.
A lot of producers these days honestly approach making music with this mindset. I need to prove that I am good. So then what ends up happening? Well, what to them feels like pouring their heart and soul into a track, to the listener honestly ends up being way too much to take in. Kind of like when you're on a date and the other person tells you kind of way too much and it ends up being TMI.
But sometimes like the simplest sound, like this song, you listen to it, it's like drums, a bass sound and a vocal, and there's nothing else. It's just so simple, but it's quite hard to get that to actually work. And so it took a little while to figure it out. But then there's other tracks, that I make from scratch, and it all comes together really, really quickly.
But with everything getting simpler now, the competition and honestly the sheer amount of music that you now have to shine through just goes way up. So then if we know that our tracks should highlight a single core idea, then why is it that the big DJs and producers' tracks sound simple yet so full and professional, but when you try to make a simple track, it still kind of feels like something's missing?
I feel like there's a very fine line between great dance tracks and nursery rhymes. But then for like tracks that are going to actually, sound really good in a club, invariably, it's simple. The simple stuff is always the stuff that works the best. Actually, that's the most infuriating thing is the fucking tracks that I spend so much time on, I put so much effort into. I go and play them in a club and I'm like, oh my God, that sounds fucking awful.
So then in order to understand how to make all this work, let's take a look at the following shot. So to start, in this shot, we have our subject. Now, to you, this could symbolize your main core idea or the thing you want to shine through in your track. So this could be, for example, a vocal or a lead synth playing a melody. Now, in order to bring out this subject, we need some lighting. Now, to you, the lighting is going to symbolize your drums and your bass. And it's really important to note that different lighting can honestly change how the subject feels to the viewer, much like how changing your drum patterns and drum sound selection can not only change the way your track feels, but even change the genre of your track. Okay, but now even with those two, this shot still looks kind of dull, which is now why we're gonna add some background lights and some things to the background. Now, these elements aren't really screaming for attention, but they honestly add a lot of life to the shot. Exactly like how adding pads, atmospheres, effects, and ear candy can really add a lot of life to your tracks. But now the thing is, the big DJs and producers aren't really just adding effects and ear candy randomly in their tracks just because.
But yeah, Noiser, he's just so good at making simple tracks sound really big. And I think that's like a lot of like his catalog. Oftentimes I do too much and I'm like, oh, I just want to add more stuff and want to make this and change this. And for him, it's more like, okay, let's try to keep it just simple, but sound like all the elements just sound really good. And I think that's kind of what we did with Push to Start.
Okay, so now when we know we have a good idea, I honestly feel like most producers know to fill in the blanks. Now, you can use a technique here like call and response. But sometimes, even with that, your tracks still don't sound as full and professional as what you hear the bigger producers doing. And it all comes down to the fact that your track is lacking depth, texture, and an anchor. You see, even though we filled in the spaces horizontally, a lot of what's playing is still in the same octave. So by adding ear candy that fills in these gaps vertically, so above and below this main idea, we can start to add a bit of depth to this track.
No, I really don't stop when I'm bumping that.
And if you noticed, each one of those synth fills sounds completely different than the rest, which gives your listener the chance to experience different textures. which is super important because without them, then your main idea can kind of start to get dull and repetitive, but they're not too crazy and over the top as to take away from the main idea. But then what about the anchor? Well, if we look carefully at each one of these synth fills, they're actually playing the exact same note. And if we look at the track, because we're in the key of E flat minor here, and each one of these notes are playing in E flat, they'll practically go with whatever melody is playing on top. And because we change the octaves and the textures of these synth fills, they don't get as repetitive as just playing an E flat over and over and over again. Okay, now this in music theory is a technique known as pedal point, and I'm actually going to include the stems from today's track for free down below in the description so that you can see in depth how to apply the techniques from this video. But if you want to see how some of the biggest DJs and producers are using this exact technique in their music, then you need to watch this video next.